on this less than bright Thursday morning. But anyway, today is Thursday, December 5th, 2019. The time is 9:01 a.m., just about by 2 seconds, okay? And I am calling this meeting to order. This is our weekly meeting with our community development organization, and typically attending, of course, is Director David Callahan and Deputy Civil Prosecuting Attorney Pat Braden. Also attending Commissioners Duncan Brooks and Filios. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Okay, I have no specific opening remarks, so we'll move on to our, oh, by the way, I'm going to poll for potential conflict of interest. Wait, back up, Pledge of Allegiance. I'm getting sloppy because there are some days we do it 2 and 3 times. Mary, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any conflicts of interest?
Nope.
None for me. Okay, first item of business. Briefing on tax deed AIN 103290, an informational item. Director Callahan, please.
Commissioners, good morning. Good morning, everyone. On the screen to your left, my right, you'll see a remnant portion of land that the county owns, and it's been presented to your staff and then my staff for tax purposes to be purchased, I mean. And this is one of those cases where it should not be sold to anyone other than a direct neighbor, for reasons that are obvious on the screen, I hope. There's a write-up from Mary in your electronic file if you need it, but that's really all this is about.
Do we know if the bid received is from a contiguous?
I don't know that, Mary, do you know the details on that?
I do not.
But Terry would know.
But you say, this is important, you say should not, and I understand why that is. How about if somebody else came in and said, well, I want to buy it?
It's problematic.
Okay, so.
For at least 3 reasons that jump out at me. There may not be physical access.
Mhm.
A. B, it's a remnant so small you can't actually do anything on it that meets land use code.
Mhm.
You can't build on it, you
Mhm.
can't. I mean, nothing you could put on there would meet setbacks.
But I still want to buy it.
It would serve no useful purpose.
I still want to buy it.
And it would create conflicts with your neighbors, because you can't
Who
get
says?
to it.
Who says?
Okay.
I'm just saying,
You could do that if you want to.
okay. I'm not going to bid on it, okay?
All right.
And
My advice is you don't set you and the county up for those.
I
kinds of
understand.
situations.
It would be within the board's discretion ultimately.
Okay, you certainly can if that's where you want to go.
I do tend to concur with Mr. Callahan's advice that it would be I think in everybody's best interest if a neighbor purchased it.
I would agree with that, but I'm just saying, I don't want to run afoul. I know we
No,
have no troublemakers in Kootenai County.
Well, and Bill, just to piggyback on your point, a lot of the reason we get these properties is for what you just described. For whatever reason, somebody had it that way and then could never use it, and then it went to tax sale.
I agree.
Plus, which, if I'm not abutting, I'm potentially landlocked, aren't I?
Uh-huh.
And that's also illegal, isn't it?
Not
Or
illegal
could be.
per se. It just creates possible
Problems, yeah.
problems.
Yeah, you basically have to trespass over somebody else's property to get to yours.
Yeah, so you need an
unless-
easement.
Unless you had some legal.
Right,
I
right,
understand.
understood.
I
Okay.
understand all that, and I appreciate
Okay.
that, so.
Are we good then? Any other questions? I guess we can have a motion.
I
Can't,
guess-
oh, no, well, no, we can't, because we don't.
There's
Yeah,
nothing
I have one more.
Yes, Pat, go ahead.
Yeah, the bid isn't before you right now. so-
Okay.
But I was just, I think it was a tax deed in 2010, and were we able to confirm that it actually went through the sale?
I don't know, Mary, do you?
That
Do you
would,
have a copy of the memo?
It's in the electronic file folder.
yeah,
Pull it up.
I didn't recall there being any mention of that.
It doesn't mention
You
it.
didn't? Okay.
Reason being is, assuming it did go through the tax deed sale, then you would be able to sell the property, to whomever you want for however much
I can verify that, because I usually talk to the treasurer and see what taxes are owed and that kind of
Yeah.
thing too.
Yeah, and given it was in 2010, they should still have that record.
Sure.
Okay.
And should we also confirm that it is in fact contiguous to
Yeah.
the bidder?
I got that on my
Okay,
list too.
okay, good,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
I'll wait till you're ready for the next item.
Did you want to finish this?
I'm done on the,
Oh, on item
Yeah,
number,
yeah,
on item number 8, okay,
I'll
fine.
have the answers to those questions
Okay.
before we open the bid.
Okay, fair enough.
At a
Right.
business meeting.
Okay then, second item.
thank you.
Item B, possible code amendment for Idaho Department of Corrections for the Reentry Center. And this calls for potential action item, which means, folks, that we could hold a possible vote today on the proposed code amendment. Director Callahan?
Not
No.
quite.
Yeah,
Let me offer a few.
you could direct staff to move forward with the process.
That's really the purpose of this discussion, is, let me back up and give you a little context.
Go ahead, back up.
We have regulations in place that could shoehorn in a conditional use permit review for this sort of group. I would
Mhm.
rather it be crystal clear. If you are getting the sense from the state or anywhere else that we're going to get one of these reentry centers, my advice is that you instruct the staff today to work with the planning commission, which we have to, come up with a new set of standards for one of these facilities, and then it would be in front of you through a duly noticed public hearing. It would also go to the planning commission first.
So that's what you mean by an action item,
Yes,
it's our
sir.
providing
You'd be, what
direction
Pat
for
said,
staff.
you'd be
Okay.
authorizing or directing your choice, staff, to move forward with a code amendment.
Understood.
But I'd like to get a sense from you what kind of code amendment you'd like. What I sent, what's on the screen and what I sent to you by email is a approach I happen to know of from a place I used to work. And the usefulness of it is, it gets to what the planning commission is concerned about, which is we could make it so expressly detailed in dimensions of how far away it has to be from residential and commercial, and it can only be in these certain zoning districts and so on and so forth, that you make it a relatively rare thing that can happen in this county and therefore can be approved by right, possibly. The plan, I say it that way because our plan commission is hoping that we go through the entire code, our current planning commission, and eliminate some of the many conditional use permit procedures we now have. They'd rather see more things by right with standards built into it. So one approach would be a by right use. That's kind of what you see on the screen here. Although in this particular case, the community I borrowed it from still did it by CUP. They have some express standards that you saw, and I left them in there. So it can go CUP, it can go by right, it could be a combination of the two, by right in some zoning districts, by CUP in others. That's the level of detail we would presumably work through with the planning commission through a public hearing and then you. But what I really need to hear from you today is whether you think this kind of need is imminent and necessary and we should just get started on it.
Thoughts? Leslie? Bill?
I think it's a good idea to bring it forward to the planning commission and see what their thoughts are on it. I'm wondering, and this is more of a question for Pat, and if you can't answer it now, that's fine. Can we put in our code something that says it has to be privately run and it cannot be government run?
You could. I think that would be maybe subject to challenge by the state, but I mean, we have other uses that are expressly public or private, so.
So
That is a possibility.
when we had the Federal Reentry Center here in Coeur d'Alene, it was privately run. And I'm not aware of problems that, and so my concern is the public versus privately run thing. Because I think privately run has a little bit more motivation to say that they're gonna do things.
It could be, you know, bear in mind, you know, they'd still be a government contractor.
Sure.
And,
Mhm.
you know, they, and the, you know, governmental entity that sponsors it would still be responsible for any
Sure,
wrongdoing.
sure. Okay, yeah, I mean,
Good.
that's fine with me.
Bill, thoughts?
Well, when David talks about by right
Mhm.
or by
CUP.
conditional use permit,
Yes, sir.
I like the conditional use permit. There are a lot of things that we don't want that someone could, as you say, shoehorn their way in by
Right.
doing all the things that by right and then say, I demand it. Now,
If it's by right, they meet the requirements, we can't say no.
that's what I mean. I like to say no when I need to,
Right,
so
I get that.
I don't like, I want to do it by conditional use permit, or at least have that vote, and I don't much care whether it's public or private. There are problems with both, and the director of the Department of Corrections told me, we don't go where we're not wanted. That's what he told
Did
me.
he say how they get that sentiment?
He just said, we don't go where we're not wanted. And as someone who talks to a lot of people,
That would be the usefulness of a CUP, is we would hear that loud and clear.
loud and clear, that's right. And I've heard about 90 to 95%, we don't want it.
I have to.
Okay, I understand. I think that's important to keep in mind, that that message, I didn't say, you shouldn't go where you're not wanted. He said, we don't go where we're not wanted.
Well, I actually find that encouraging.
Well,
Yeah, that was actually a quote in the newspaper
Newspaper,
too.
okay.
right, did he say that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I take him at his word, so that's not a problem.
What do you know?
I just think going down this road is starting to monkey around with by right, is the camel's nose in the tent. And I just assume keep the camel's nose out of the tent, whether it's public or private. My problem is, I think commissioner's first duty is to protect the public. And I think having one of those in this county puts the public at risk. So if that tells you where I'm
Are
coming
you
from.
comfortable with the notion that you would have one somewhere?
In
Is
Kootenai
it
County?
conceivable to you that it could go somewhere in the county?
No,
So in that case, there's no reason to do this at all.
that's right.
Okay.
So right now, there's no place in the county that is permitted by
Well-
CUP or by right?
Actually, the correctional, Pat will have to help me. There's
By
a section
CUP?
in the correctional facility, we just wrote in the last,
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about?
yeah, I do, my computer's not
Oh, okay.
working right now.
I think
I know in the code it is addressed.
when we were looking at doing the sheriff's, the jail expansion, we amended the code to make it clear
Correct.
that we have those kinds of facilities in the county. I think it's conceivable this use could fall under that jail facility.
It's, well,
That's where I need to go
the
back and do
halfway
the
house
research.
isn't really a correctional facility.
But the language we have is broad.
Yeah,
I
I'd have
wanna-
to.
We'll need to go back and
I have to
look.
go back and look at it, but there isn't anything expressly addressing this.
Right now today. And I think the usefulness, especially even if you don't want it, the usefulness of having something like this in here, and we limit it to some very refined areas and by CUP, is it's unambiguous, we're capturing this use. And if it does land here, it's going through this process.
Right, but with the CUP attached to, even if you have this
Mhm.
strict regulations plus the CUP, then,
Then you can still deny,
yep.
or any future board can too.
So the Federal Reentry Center that was here in Coeur d'Alene in years past, if it was in the city of Coeur d'Alene, then this doesn't.
Right, the city has their own regs.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, we don't have jurisdiction there. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting discussion, and I remember having this discussion with a former county commissioner before I took office. And I was trying to make the case that we really ought to minimize the CUP process and allow more by right, as long as it's appropriately defined and protects, the health of the county, if you will, and its residents. but there are gonna be those situations where it's just inappropriate. So I think I'd almost be in favor of preserving the CUP process insofar as this type of establishment is concerned. Now, my understanding, and I've heard this from at least one of our legislators, is that when this was passed in Boise and funded, that it was targeted for Kootenai County, and I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, but that is my understanding. That it is targeted, I see the nods, that it is targeted for this county.
Okay.
I'm gonna leave it at that, I can't opine any further because I don't know
Well,
whether
that
that
would be the
means.
reason to do something.
There you go.
Okay.
That's my concern. So that would then almost, I mean, what we would conclude from that, or infer from that, is that we would need to preserve the CUP process, correct?
I'd like a motion and a second to that effect.
So just so we're clear, so are we talking about bringing the suggestions forward as long as there's a CUP involved, or we're leaving everything the way it is because the CUP is required now?
It's your call. My suggestion to you as a
Go right
board
ahead.
is that you authorize staff to begin developing a new section of the code expressly for reentry areas, and your desire is that it's by CUP.
I'm fine with that.
How do you feel?
I'm not. I mean,
I thought you wanted to preserve the CUP.
that's all. I don't want to go down the road starting with how we might allow it in. I'm taking the Director of Corrections at his word. Pardon me, I may be naive.
Well, I get that. May I jump in?
Please.
I think what would help you is that this is one of those cases where it's better to have regulations on the book to say how you deal with something than to not, where it's loose and open-ended and we have to argue about it.
We don't have to argue, we have to vote on it.
No, right now today, I have to argue what it fits in, and if it doesn't fit within any of our categories, they can sue us and say, it's allowed right here.
Yeah, it's not, basically, it's not clear now, and this would, conceivably make it clear,
Thank you, Pat.
which makes my job a lot easier. And Dave.
I don't like it.
Okay.
You want to comment further?
No, just that I think when I see, a provision for 50 residents are permitted, a halfway house may not be located, and district permitted, all these things allow for a bureaucrat to figure out a way to shoehorn that thing in and say, now I've got it by right. Because
Oh,
I've
no,
complied,
okay.
I've complied with all your little conditions.
But that's not true for a CUP, and what two
Well-
of your members are saying is they want this by CUP.
Why don't we do all our things that we do now do through CUPs with having extra legal language woven
We
in?
do. We have this kind of thing in our other CUPs.
For all of them.
We do.
Well, I haven't seen them.
Yes, you have, actually.
Oh, no.
When we bring them before you.
When we sit here,
Uh-huh.
we get a recommendation for or against, and we say, here's where it is okay for, and here's where it's against.
But for instance, in our mining regs, it lays out additional setbacks and other things like this
Mhm.
in a CUP for mining. Similarly, for CUPs for other uses we do. We have these kinds of further steps built
Line
into
does.
the code.
And they're scaled to the use, so more intensive or potentially controversial uses tend to have more requirements, where, ones that are,
Right.
less problematic have fewer.
That's why you see a fair number of them on this one, is people worry about these things.
Well, think of the most onerous use you could devise for a property in Kootenai County. Okay? Should we then go ahead and make all these little conditions and things? No, we should just simply say no.
Oh, okay, I think I see where it's going. We could list out a use and say it's prohibited.
I mean, that could be one option that you forward to the planning commission. I mean, that's always a possibility.
Define it this way and then say this use is prohibited in all zoning districts.
I'd be in favor of that.
I don't personally feel comfortable with the legalities of that, because usually you only list uses that you intend to allow somewhere, in some place. But I suppose that's a board's discretion. What do you think, Pat?
It's, you know, it's certainly a possibility and an option that the board could, or, you know,
So-
the planning commission could consider and then forward a recommendation.
So in essence, we would be indicating that almost every use, or most conceivable uses are acceptable, and we're gonna single one out as unacceptable. And I guess, and this is really more of a question for Pat, can you defend that in a court of law?
This one, I think it's an arguable point. I mean, I think I would have, you know, I could make meritorious arguments that we do have the authority under local land use planning act to do just that. And normally, you know, with a few exceptions, the state is required to go through local, you know, land use permitting processes. And this would be one of them.
I mean, it wouldn't be considered discriminatory?
Well, I don't think discriminating against the state is illegal, but,
You have to remember that.
you know, again, I can't guarantee 100% an outcome, but I do think I would be able to at least make meritorious arguments that should be upheld if that were the case.
Do you want to comment further before we move on?
No, we can move on. I don't know why, I don't know what the house on fire is that we need to do
We
this
need to take
today.
action.
But apparently somebody's got something in the plans for Kootenai County. And I'm not in favor of it.
Leslie?
I'm fine with sending both to the planning commission, saying, look, we have this template that the director found, you know, we want a CUP attached to it, and explore options of prohibiting the use altogether.
I'm good with
Both
that.
of those.
And then ultimately, we get to make the decision and take the
Anyway,
hits.
right,
And
it's
we'll
your
have-
call on the code amendment.
Right.
Yeah, and public hearing,
Right.
you know, will be required, so
Right.
everybody will have a chance to weigh in, both sides.
Ought to be festive.
And ultimately, I guess we also get to decide what goes before the public hearing. So when the planning commission does what
Yeah.
you
Right.
do,
Yeah.
and for the sake of a common understanding here, you come before us and you say, okay, here are the two versions. Here's a CUP that identifies the intended use and where it's permitted or prohibited. And here's another version which says we are identifying this as disallowed.
Mhm.
And then we get to decide before we go to a public hearing what it is we're recommending. Fair statement?
At the public hearing.
At the public hearing.
Right. The plan commission would recommend, you would decide.
Okay?
I guess I'm still concerned that we're gonna get potentially tied up in court. Because this can be, go ahead, Pat.
I think it would be better and more legally defensible if we had a CUP, or, you know, approval process. And then, assuming the board said no, then we would have a record on which to base that decision that I could then defend. Just like any other use that's.
See, I get where Bill's coming from, because I think, and I'm not gonna try to put words in your mouth.
Good.
I think you're, but my understanding is you're trying to shut the door.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I took, like I said, I took the director of corrections at his word, period, end of subject. And the Department of Corrections is the only organization I know that would want to put a community release center in Kootenai County. And there's nothing to preclude us, when we do have a conditional use permit, from having public hearings. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right.
Okay, so we could hear from the public,
Yeah.
Yes.
just.
If it were CUP, you would have a public.
That's right.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is, so that door is not shut by not doing anything at this point.
I do think we could put sideboards on any CUP to say things like you see there, that it has to meet this, and this, and this, and this.
Which is what this proposal.
Before it can actually go forward for a CUP. So that would limit the opportunity.
Correctional facilities are currently not one of the uses that requires a CUP.
Right.
So,
So right now, we
Meaning-
have more risk of
Yes,
one coming in.
yes, arguably.
So you're saying that it's essentially currently by right?
Well, correctional facility is by right, there's a,
This isn't a correctional
isn't the
facility.
No, it
I was
isn't.
just gonna say, it's, which actually makes it worse right now, because it's not specifically.
The language, as I recall it, though, is broad about it being associated with correctional facility and so
Well,
on.
I
and so
think it's
forth.
an arguable point. Let's
Right,
put it
I'd
that way.
rather-
I would rather it not be an
Right.
arguable point.
Agreed.
Mary, you wanted, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Mary Shaw, for the record. The public safety facility definition includes detention or correctional facilities.
Okay,
And
it's,
it
that
does
still doesn't,
require
yeah, that
A
still
conditional
doesn't,
use permit.
Doesn't
to me,
apply.
to me, that still doesn't
Yeah.
expressly include this use.
That's true.
Doug, would you like, I'm gonna, normally we reserve public comment for the very end, but because we're on this topic, I'm just gonna open it up briefly, so in case you choose to speak, go right ahead, Doug.
Thanks. For the record, I guess Doug O'Conowitz.
And to give credit where credit's due, you essentially proposed this.
I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah, and thank you guys for being so responsive and working on it with a holiday in between. It only took about 2 weeks. It's moving fast and I really appreciate it. I think, from my sense of this conversation, I do think the CUP is probably the way to go. I think it avoids any preemption arguments. If you just categorically say you can't come, I think you open yourself up a bit more to a preemption argument. The CUP approach can be essentially as restrictive as you want, and as I understand it right now, based on other things I'm hearing here and what I've already looked at, I believe, Commissioner Brooks, they can just come in and not ask you now. So if you get a conditional use permit on the books before they show up, you change the playing field. They can't, you don't have to worry about them being grandfathered in if they duck in before you've done something. And then they have to have you at the table, and you can decide whether they can come at all or what things you want to consider. I think if you try and limit yourself to things up front and not use a conditional use permit, you might miss something that you care about later, but you haven't been able to, you didn't think about it. It didn't come up in your head in advance. So the CUP I think, approach is a very good insurance policy. I also think it sends a very clear message that this is not something you're welcoming with open arms, but if it's going to come, they've got to satisfy you. And if they don't, you can ask them to go somewhere else.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
John Grimm.
John Grimm, yeah.
Commissioner Brooks, I appreciate your willingness to take Director Tuwalt at his word. However, there have been enough conflicting statements among our group that's fighting this to warrant concern with that position. The second thing is, and I realize this is hearsay, but I have on good authority from inside the IDOC that, quote, we are building this in Kootenai County come hell or high water. The other thing is, it absolutely is a correctional facility. Keep in mind, these people are still incarcerated when they're being released there, because we question the legality of being able to release prisoners that have been convicted and sentenced to a certain time frame for one person, the director, to be able to say, we're going to release these people early. Their response is they're not technically released, they are still incarcerated in our custody. They're just in your area. And there is a tremendous sense of urgency here.
So,
Doug, go right ahead.
sorry, Chairman. Commissioner Brooks, I do think that this is actually the best approach for you to have a better chance of stopping it. By doing nothing, I think you leave yourself exposed. I want to make sure that's clear.
I don't intend to do nothing.
Okay.
I don't think this is a time and a place, and I don't see the house on fire that we've got to call the fire department.
Mhm.
And I think this is a tremendous rush to be able to put in a bunch of weasel words that will allow somebody to shoehorn the facility in Kootenai County by right.
That's why I like the CUP. Yeah.
That's why I am for the CUP only.
Good.
I'm interested in the lawyer here in the front row.
Yeah, go right ahead, Dwayne. Wayne Rasmussen, I'll announce you, how's that?
I was wanting to jump up and make responses all the way through this, but knew I couldn't.
Go right ahead.
I don't know if that I would want to do a legal analysis of it. It's not the old kind of system, although it's been around for a long time. But the people are against this. We all stand in jeopardy of having real problems if this comes in here. We try to be kind to the governor because many of us like him, but this has to be stopped. Now, the means of stopping it, we could look at a variety of options, and I won't hold anybody against anybody for trying to do what the people want. But the people want this stopped and prevented, and it needs to go to Lewiston if at all possible. That is an option, and 130 beds is way too many. We can't have 130 beds. If they were saying 12, then they might have an argument. But the people don't want it. This is pre-parole. That's what needs to be beat into our heads if we can't figure it out. It's pre-parole. It's prison. It's not a halfway house like in the 1950s. This is inmates driving other inmates around in a bus. This is one of the worst things we could do for our community. And so whatever way we can stop this, legitimate way that we can stop this, needs to be done.
Okay.
Thanks. If you got a question on what I said, I'm happy to respond, but I don't care how we get there, it's just got to stop.
Any other, I'm sorry.
Oh, I just, my question to you would be, in the example that Director Callahan came up with, it says no more than 50 residents are permitted. I mean, could we say 25? I mean,
Say any number
no.
you want.
Yeah.
Right.
and oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Leslie.
And once again, these are all the things you have to meet before you can even come forward with the conditional use permit.
Right.
And then the conditional use permit, we will have the
Additional
process go
conditions.
through,
Yeah.
additional
Right.
conditions,
Right.
if we approve at all.
Right.
And I'm inclined to go with both Doug and John's arguments. If you want to draw a line in the sand, and you had better be prepared to defend it, and we can say, oh yeah, we can do that. Well, yes, okay, so maybe 98% of the public stands up and says we're opposed to it, but that doesn't mean that's what's going to hold up in a court of law. I would rather take a position that says, okay, here are the criteria, as Leslie was just referring to, and we can keep that criteria strict, and at least reserve the ability to to still be assertive in our wishes as a community, but to be able to say, we're not exactly drawing a line in the sand here, that we know should they decide to cross it, we may not necessarily have recourse. That's my concern. And I think that's what both John and Doug are expressing. And I think if we go down that road, it could be very dangerous for us.
And I think the CUP process will give the board, basically veto power over this.
Right.
So, which I think, goes to the opponents that, you have your chance to make your case to the board where you arguably don't now, and then they make their decision. So, I would support going forward with the CUP process for this.
I'm sorry.
Summer Bush,
yeah, go
now,
ahead.
as you know, I'm for less regulation, but this CUP conditional use permit, can you kind of explain more in layman's terms the difference between more things by right versus conditional use? Because usually I fall under let's have less regulation, like with the code stuff, which I have been reading, but what's the difference in those just in layman's terms? Because I'm hearing you guys speak with a lot of lingo, and I'm kind of getting it, but I know most
Okay.
people won't.
Director Callahan, go right ahead.
The easy takeaway is that a conditional use permit here and everywhere in the United States requires a process. The process is public. Usually in most communities it's 6 months or more to get in front of a hearing examiner or planning commission, and then the final decision maker is either a city council or board of county commissioners. that process is what makes it so that the public can weigh in, and notwithstanding any standards in the code, any legislative body can say, this doesn't fit our comp plan in our community, and the conditional use is denied for those reasons.
Well, then what's by right then?
You meet certain minimums, you're in, you're done, you don't get a review.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So,
It's a shortened process.
For instance, a single-family home in Kootenai County in most zoning districts here, like agricultural, ag suburban, is a by right use.
Yeah, in fact, we just made that a by right use in the commercial zone too, so a little less regulation. So,
Thank you.
So in back to your point, somewhere in layman's terms, if you're in a 5-acre zone, you purchase a 5-acre lot, you're ready to build your home, you conform to the zoning regulation, you're off and running.
Pull a building permit for the
You
home,
get
you're
pull a
done.
building permit
Right.
and.
But then there's no public hearing.
No,
Right.
none
Right.
whatsoever,
But then if I have the 5 acres and I want a different easement, then I have to go through, right?
Not
Like if I
necessarily.
wanted exceptions,
a different use.
Okay.
Like, I can give you an example, a cargo container. So you can go build an under 200 square foot building right now
Right.
on your 5-acre parcel with that's
Right.
by right. But if you want a cargo container, then you have to go through the
With the presumption
special
of
use
notice.
process.
yeah, that was a
Presumption.
special notice.
Yeah, special
Okay.
notice.
Right.
no, that
So
makes more sense.
essentially, this would say, okay, this, as long as you meet all these criteria, you can apply for a conditional use permit. And then you go through that process. We wouldn't just, at least I wouldn't be interested in just saying, okay, this is allowed by right. I would say, if you meet these qualifications, you can apply for a CUP. We'll take you through that process.
And so if you did a CUP for the reentry thing, then they have to go through a long
Precisely.
process with public hearing.
Precisely.
Yes.
Or by right, if they meet the minimum requirements, they go.
Precisely, and with
Okay.
the
Okay, that
CUP,
makes
let's say there are 10 conditions, hypothetically, that are
Yeah.
written into the CUP, and they meet 9, we can reject it for the 1. We have that right.
Okay.
Say, I'm sorry, you didn't meet all 10.
Well, and even beyond that, I didn't pull it
Go right
in
ahead.
here for simplicity's sake, but in the Land Use and Development Code, there are additional criteria that apply to every CUP. There are things like it has to be in conformance with the comp plan. It has to be so on and so forth.
Not in conflict with the public interest, I think is the other one.
And that's the catch-all where you can almost always find a rationale for denial if you get, I'm making this up, but 100 people show up at your hearing, 59 of them are opposed, that meets that criteria, you deny, you're done, and the
Right.
courts will withhold you.
Right, and there's 7 of those criteria, is it 7?
That sounds about right, I don't remember right now.
Vlad, do you remember? Is it 7?
The
For
CUP
the
standards beyond this ones and threes.
Uh-huh.
There are standard, for the record, Vlad Finkel with community development, there are standard procedures for evaluating any CUP, but as Director Callahan had stated, the conditional use section of our code has specific parameters and sideboards for any conditional use classification that may or may not work out for the applicant, such as minimum lot size, such as landscaping requirements, such as screening and buffering, parking requirements, you name it, noise. There's different impacts that, in the event the applicant cannot mitigate them with the conditions of approval, the
Right.
hearing body has the option to deny it, and that gives the applicant and the opponents the due process for voicing their opinions on the matter.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm gonna cut it off at this point. Let's do it. How about moving to a motion?
Sure. I move that we forward recommendations to the Planning Commission for a code amendment with a CUP regarding halfway house / pre-parole Department of Corrections Reentry Center for
Their
review
recommendations.
and recommendation.
I will second.
Bill Brooks,
No,
Commissioner Duncan.
Aye.
Chairman Rios.
Aye, and the motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
we'll also let the planning commission know about Commissioner Brooks's,
Absolutely.
about Bill's opposition. So, your voice will be.
Which is
heard.
duly noted by the way.
Okay.
Okay. So we're gonna move on to item C, which is the planning commission's recommendation to place the comprehensive plan update document in front of the existing comp plan, which is the 2010, and to make an appendix out of the remaining sections of the 2010 comp plan, minus the goals, objectives, and policies. And this is an informational item. Yeah, if you'd like to leave, by all means.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it. You bet. Thank you. Good to see you, Dwayne. So Director Callahan, would you like to lead us off?
This decision by the Plan Commission was at a workshop, and the chair is here to reinforce and further explain, but it really backs up, in my view, the discussion you had at your hearing where we talked about what if. And Pat went so far as to work up the document you've now seen. And so to me, the usefulness of this is it puts the Plan Commission on record of saying that we think this is a good idea. David, do you want to jump in?
No, I think that we always were afraid that if we would have embedded the updated goals, objectives, and policy in the master document, there'd be confusion because the words in sections may not support exactly the goals, objectives, and policies. So our goal was, our objective, whatever you want to call it, was to basically have the new goals, objectives, and policies as the main document with the future land use maps. Everything else will be, and data, and everything else will be appendix. And we even, in the current proposal that you have for the update, we want to take the data and make it an appendix that will be updatable constantly based on the source of information. So we were trying to do this in steps, but we just wanted to go, because there was some discussion at our workshop about a document that was prepared at the request of the tribe that Pat did a good job of doing to redline it, and I think that may have caused some confusion, so we just wanted to go on record and say that we support having this main document as an appendix, and then the goal, objectives, and policies is the beginning of it. Exactly what Pat has given you.
And does the land use map also fall into the update?
Currently not.
No.
No, it's just the goal, objectives,
It
and
was,
policies.
yeah, it was not part of the scope
Oh,
of the
okay.
update. That's why when I did my draft of this format, I didn't put the future land use map or any of that in the update, because I didn't want to confuse people.
Okay, so
more.
that would remain in the
What
2010?
what we could do, and that kind of segues nicely into the comment I was gonna make anyway, is that my only, and I've talked to a couple of you about this already, but my only suggestion would be to make the future land use map and the explanation of that from the 2010 plan its own section, because frankly, I think it's too important to the comp plan to just relegate to an appendix. Now, if you want, we could call Appendix A future land use map, and then Appendix B 2010 comp plan. You know, if you want to be, truer to the Planning Commission's recommendation, that would be fine with me. But I do think that should be broken out of the main plan and made its own section, because, like I said, because of its importance to the plan.
Okay.
And the plan was to, once the goal, objectives, and policies is approved in some format, was to immediately go and tackle the land use map and data.
And then once that's done and approved, that
Right.
would just be, just
Moved from an appendix
replaced,
into.
Understood.
Yeah,
the
you could
current
do it,
language will be
yeah.
replaced with the newly approved.
It's almost a four-step process: goal, objectives, and policy, land use maps, data, and then all the other stuff that's in the appendix.
Right,
Mhm.
I like that. Is there a public hearing required each step of the way? Like, we go forward, we approve, let's just, for argument's sake, the 16 pages, the Appendix A for the map, the Appendix B for that. When we update the map, is that public hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
But on the appendix for the data, do you think that could be done in a way where the staff could continuously update data?
I think I would probably wait for the process to go forward regarding that. And then I think at that point, we would, certainly, could put that into a module that then that could be updated.
You see, the original concept was, instead of actually David's organization updating everything all the time, is if it's US Census data, we would point to the census data. And as that is updated, the
You could
person
say,
getting the
say
most.
then current census.
Yeah, and if it was state information, it would come from the state. David would have to input his own building, building permits, whatever we desire. We also wanted to look at the data itself and make, with David's help, make a good concept of just maybe reducing what we collected. We only want meaningful data that helps with strategic planning and comprehensive planning. There's some stuff in the current plan that may not be necessary.
So as you update the data, that would roll into the appendix, presumably?
Well, that's the question. I mean, it would, but what I still don't know is how much of this, after the first round, we could set up so it doesn't have to be a continuous public hearing process.
Well, if it's statistical data, like for example.
You would think we could
make
do
that
it
a
the
bit-
same way we do in the code, where we have, for the land use code, where we adopt fees by resolution periodically.
Okay.
And that's a simpler process than a public hearing. But I'm wondering if we couldn't set up the appendix after we get through this next round, such that the staff and the plan commission can just update it and call it good.
As long as that, as long as that's part of the.
Original motion for.
Yeah, and then actually, comp plans and comp plan updates are actually adopted by resolution.
Right.
So we would include the language of the resolution.
In the resolution for following
Yeah.
updates to data to allow the staff and plan
Yes.
commission to update.
Right.
That's what I was trying to get at.
So we don't have to make that decision
No,
today.
no, I just
That's
wanted you to be
correct.
aware.
Right.
Sure,
The plan commission's got your back on this one, if you will.
sure.
Okay.
Well, I would be in favor of doing the 16 pages, the map as A, the 2010 as B appendix or appendices, and then revisit that later after we
Right.
get through
Yeah,
this
sure.
process and approve it, and then
Sure.
talk about how it looks
How we're
going
gonna-
forward.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Sure.
the map, my understanding, it's gonna be full public process, just like the.
Yes, it will.
Okay, and then after the map's done, we can talk about how do we
And-
wanna go forward, because I wanna be transparent and
Right.
open, so the
Right.
public
That'd
understands.
be helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And typically, just so you know, the data drives the map.
Right.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Do you need anything further?
No, just wanted you to be aware.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have the continued hearing on this whenever.
The
Then
23rd.
January
23rd,
23rd,
yes.
right?
Mhm.
Right.
Understood. Okay then. So what I'm going to do is call for public comment, because the next item is executive session, and rather than dismiss the folks and then have them wait around, so why don't we just move on to public comment? Anything? Dave?
I just wanted to clarify, when David talked about the planning commission wanting to make more things by right, it was never intended to do away with the CUP process. All it was.
Oh,
was to
no, precisely.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that there was no confusion. We wanted to evaluate all the current permitting uses and where it makes sense to make it by right, and where it doesn't make sense to continue the CUP process. But the other thing we also have in our document is we want to outline exactly what a person would have to do in order to achieve approval of a CUP process, the steps. David gave us an example, I think of Dallas, where they actually had a lot of information, so there was clarity and transparency about how the process would be evaluated by community development. So we are just trying to streamline the process.
Fair enough.
Thank
Good
you.
point. Any other comments? Go right ahead.
I would like to recommend that.
Name, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Norma White. I would like to recommend that the supporting data still be in an appendix instead of fully incorporated, because that is information that changes you know, with time,
Yes,
over
it
time.
does.
Yeah.
And so
Yes, it
it makes
does.
sense that if the plan is going to remain the same for a number of years, but the data is going to change over time, that they be separate.
That's a good
So
point.
that was
Good
my
point.
comment.
Makes sense.
And actually, I don't know if you've ever had a chance, but when you do get the opportunity, just go into our website, kcgov.us, and you'll see a tab, Performance Indicators, and that is updated with some frequency. In fact, a couple of the indicators update automatically on a daily basis, but you can get a very broad perspective of what the county is all about and how we rate against other jurisdictions, both county and cities within Idaho and even in some neighboring communities. Any other comments?
But, oh, I did want to say one
Yeah,
other
go
thing. I
ahead.
really appreciate the planning commission going over the CUP process, and their desire to make things better and more simple for people and more clear. So
Appreciate
that's it.
Okay, Summer.
I'm Summer Bushnell, I'm just for more, I know it makes your guys' jobs harder, I'm for more hearings than just resolutions, just
Okay.
my personal opinion.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
We're talking about the con.
Name.
We're not talking
Give your
about the
name,
con.
give your
Oh,
name.
Robert White. Cook County.
No, you can comment on any
Yeah.
Okay.
items. Go right ahead.
Last time we met, we were talking about the comp plan.
Yes,
And
sir.
we all got thrown a little loop, excuse me, as we were confused about, we thought the old comp plan that goes back about 10 years was gonna be thrown out and we were starting all over again. And when we would talk to certain commissioners, they were under that impression too, that we're getting rid of the old one and we're bringing in a new one.
You mean when you spoke with planning commissioners?
No,
Not us.
no, yeah, the planning commissioners, yes.
Okay, okay.
And there was a lot of confusion about that, because there was almost a riot in this county over that whole thing, if you remember. And, my biggest concerns is, there's still so much bad language in that. And there's, I'll bring up an example about code enforcement. We're gonna start having, talks about code enforcement coming to people's homes and making sure that they're compliant. And that really bothers me. There's a whole lot of things. There's a lot of things about the environmental movement up here that had a lot of input on that. I worked for a major aerospace defense, and we had weekly FBI meetings for security and stuff. And one of the things, if I wanted to maintain my job, I could not belong to an environmental movement, because it was all being funded by Russia at the time, and it was to destroy our Constitution. I don't see anything that's ever changed with the environmental movement in this country about destroying our property rights, because that's what they were set up to do, and to get rid of all of our constitutional personal freedom rights. And they had the guy that was the head of Greenpeace that quit, I can't think of his, Patrick Moore confirms what I'm saying here. He says the same thing, that it's all to destroy our Constitution. So when I see the Environmental Kootenai Alliance get up and speak at the end, or they never even got to speak, a lot of times they just put in letters saying this is what we wish, and we really couldn't speak against it. I look at people's property rights being destroyed. Now, believe me, I don't want to see our environment destroyed, but I don't think people have a right that don't own property to say they can tell us what to do on our property. And we've seen a lot of that when we go back to the original comp plan. And that's why I really think that a lot of that original comp plan needs, I don't want to see a police state. I came from a police state. And seeing people come on people's property, or people want to turn people in because they have an issue with that person. And we have that going on right now in this county, where someone hates someone, and they're going and turning people in for every little thing. They found out every bit of piece of property they've had, and they're turning them in. And this really bothers me that we're going in this direction. And you know, we have things like view sheds and all these words that can take people's property away. And you know what, personally, I've seen people's property taken away. I've seen the U.S. Forestry come in and burn people's homes down, that because they just didn't want them there.
Okay, I'm gonna have to stop you here,
Okay.
but I think we get the point.
Okay,
And you've been very clear,
okay, thank you.
unquestionably. Okay. Anyone else? Okay then, so let's move on to, this will conclude the open of the public segment of our meeting. We're moving on to executive session. The time is now 9:55 a.m. Thank you everyone very much, appreciate it.
I move that we enter into executive session under Idaho Code 74-206, 1A and B.
I second the motion.
Bill Brooks,
Aye.
Commissioner Duncan,
Aye.
Chair Philios.
Aye. Entering into executive session shortly with Deputy Civil Prosecuting Attorney Pat Braithwaite.